Hi everyone, welcome back to the judge test result and also the discussion part 2. So in this part 2, we will discuss on the debate exhibition result that we had last week. So yeah, without further ado, let's go. So the ranking on the debate exhibition, the debate falls under the opening debate where the first rank goes to the OO, second rank goes to OG, third rank goes to CO, and fourth rank goes to CG. Now let's talk about why CG got fourth instead of the other ranks. So CG mainly contributed on two things. Number one, they want social movement to be independent by denying or reliance to corporation for the means of promotion, and gaining support through numbers and donations are still possible. However, these 2 points were not mechanized at all. So there are lots of questions popping up in our heads. First one on what is the process and the likelihood of the social movement to gain a certain level of independence, to gain a certain level of self-sustainability. Secondly is what is the harm of that corporation's involvement? It was not really mechanized well. So yeah, that necessary questions leads to us not believing the issue of independence that have been generated in closing government. Thus, they were left out as the three other teams already agreed upon social movement still needs a certain number, still they are still vulnerable to some extent. The question is that should we rely on the promotion coming from corporations or not for the sake of the strategic advocacy? That's the main discussion that has been addressed in CO, OO, and also OG. Now to the comparisons. So let's start with the comparisons with CO first. The reason why CO did better than CG was that, unfortunately, there is a failed response coming from CG to the main contribution of CO about the capitalism issue, when CO managed to prove that capitalism should not be subjected to any blame towards the vulnerable communities, because they prove that capitalism creates the movement. Capitalism infuses the innovation, infuses certain drive for the social movement to capitalize this momentum of gaining certain support. CO managed to also prove why the corporation would most likely keep up with this trend, thus neutralizing CG's fear of corporation giving obsolete promotion to the social movement. That is another heavy contribution coming from CG, which was unfortunately not elaborated. Thus, your point was vulnerable with good responses coming from CO, and CO managed to respond that in the debate. Secondly, in the comparison between OG, the reason why OG can go over CG was because CG was unfortunately derivative in the debate in regards to OG's principle. For example, in the issue of social movement being dependent, which translates into them having no room to criticize or to challenge the corporations for any other fishy move or any other intolerable moves or notions made by the corporations. Secondly, they also believe that corporation is only capitalizing the social movement as a vehicle with no genuine commitment at all, and there is an inability for the corporation or even the social movement or even the audiences to generate conducive discussion as the aftermath of the promotion that is heavily generated by corporation. Because of that, there is no elevation coming from CG to extend government's benches, because every single thing that has been laid out by OG was heavily repeated without any elevated responses or elevated frames or even elevated examples or added analysis coming from CG in regards to OG's claim. So that's the reason why OG could go over CG. Last of all, OO can go over CG under three clashes. Number one, on which one is more realistic. OO's sense of urgency is way higher than CG. They managed to prove why social movements' inability to grasp the spectrum of people that are non-progressive is a huge issue. Thus, relying on corporation promotion is important to increase the popularity of that social movement. CG's alternative on independence was unrealistic because CG did not even illustrate on how they can self-sustain on their own without the necessary assistance coming from the corporations, in which corporations have a certain ability to generate a consistent number of customers or even consistent number of constituents that has been generated well by the opening up earlier in the debate. Secondly, in the issue of corporations accountability, OO told us about how this will impose a certain new norm for the corporation, and this new norm will only influence the company to refrain themselves from any discrimination or any other intolerable act towards the vulnerable communities, because consistency is the key for the companies to maintain their market, to maintain their consistent purchases, or even consistent customers, to stay for the sustainability of the company. CG's response was only limited to how company has no obligation at all to continue this issue, to continue the genuine commitment, and etc. But unfortunately, it was not engaging to the illustration or to the incentive that has been brought by the leader of opposition and framed well by the deputy leader of op. Thus, the claim or the response coming from CG falls under a dismissive and simplistic response in the debate. Third clash on which one is the most strategic for the social movement. OO managed to prove why this is strategic to maintain the relevance and the support because corporation thrives on a certain trend. CG did not manage to prove how social movement can gain the so-called independent success without any backbone entity, that is the corporation. And the backbone entity of corporation has been illustrated well by the opening opposition about the number of customers that they have, about the power of influence that they can generate. So the exclusivity of the corporation was heavily crystallized in opening opposition, and CG did not manage to prove why at the end of the day there is a better alternative in comparison to the corporation. So that's the reason why CG got fourth instead of the other ranks. Now let's go to why CO got third instead of the other ranks. In spite of CO's unique extension on corporations' incentive of profit sharing, CO still came up short in terms of illustrating the likelihood and the characterization and exclusivity of corporation to crystallize their extension. The reason why OG can go over CO is under three things. Number one, under the issues of minorities agency to speak up, OG has established the idea about how social movements' reliance to corporation is a form of betrayal to the constituent. Thus, the constituent, be it minority, be it general society, are going to be less incentivized to further speak up against it because, they are already betrayed by the social movement by this move. CO's response is only about how minorities can still pitch up the ideas for any critics and etc. Unfortunately, even though it's very potential coming from CO, it was not mechanized well in CO. Thus, CO's claim in this issue was not enough, was not sufficient to overthrow the case about minorities having no agency left to speak up. That is addressed heavily by the DPM and also Prime Minister. The aftermath on awareness, which is the second reason why OG goes over CO, OG managed to illustrate that there will be a fake sense of justice or even a false sense of awareness as their harm. CO was repetitive to OO in regards to widespread awareness to social movement. So under that issue, even though at best, CO managed to show the benefit of gaining like a better awareness, unfortunately, that better awareness was heavily explained initially by opening opposition earlier in the debate. And so that's the reason why under the issue of awareness, OG did better in that manner. Thirdly, on the exclusive harm of OG about the flexibility of social movement, OG believes that the social movement will not be able to utilize their power to the fullest extent or to have like a flexible move to the fullest extent because they have to rely so much on the corporation. So there might be a certain limited notion or limited move for them to extend their advocacy. Unfortunately, this issue of flexibility, even though it was not elaborated or even though it is not framed until the fullest extent coming from OG, unfortunately, there is a minimum to no response coming from CO in this matter. So that's the reason why the exclusive harm of OG persists in the debate earlier. So under that three reasons, that's the reason why OG goes over CO. All right, next one. Now, the reason why OO can go over CO, it's under three reasons. Number one, in regards to companies' accountability, CO failed to establish the company's incentive to generate donation of money, despite that being the fresh premise in CO. In comparison to OO's claim on new norm of company that ensures the sense of accountability of both company and also the social movement due to their ability to boost a certain progress of advocacy was better elaborated in leader of op and also deputy leader of op. Thus, OO get an upper hand in this issue. Secondly, in regards to the engagement to the worst case in CO, about how even though they are not being able to gain a certain direct profit, it was heavily reliant to OO's premise in regards to the massive amount of awareness that is the fruitful aftermath that has been brought by leader of opposition in the debate, when leader of opposition believed that they will still get the promotion of the corporation, which trades off the envisioned direct profit that is being problematized by opening government and also closing government in the debate. Number three, on the sense of urgency, OO's bigoted resistance of customers prior to promotion, sense of optimism to social movement is much more urgent and better elaborated in both LO and DLO in comparison to CO's claim about increasing participations from minority, despite the heavy analysis as to why increasing participation can be made by the minority. But unfortunately, in closing up, there is no necessary frames or there is no necessary emphasis as to why increasing participation from minority is a crucial benefit in comparison to the benefit that has been addressed by OO, which is about how we should topple down the preconceived notions of the bigoted resistance coming from customers, and also the main importance of us having a sense of optimism to the social movement. Because at best, your idea about increasing participation from minority, the prerequisite to achieve that increasing participation relies heavily on the optimism that has been generated by the leader of op, and it has been framed well by the deputy leader of opposition. So at best, your benefit on increasing participation relies so much on the prerequisite or the requirement that has been generated in opening opposition. So that's the reason why CO got third instead of the other ranks. So next one. Now to the last reason why OO takes the debate in comparison to OG. There are 5 things that were discussed among the core education panel. Number one, OG's claim on exposure doesn't matter was unfortunately framed out by OO, when OO proves that social movement still needs awareness by showing the popularity only occurs in a specific spectrum, for example, the progressives, thus neutralizing the claim coming from OG that says that social movement right now is already in a certain power play, they don't need much exposure and etc. They don't need the vulnerability, they don't need the reliance towards the corporation. It has been framed out by the context that has been heavily addressed by the leader of op, which was a valiant effort coming from leader of op. So that's the reason why under that first issue, OO is over OG. Second issue is on this one. Unfortunately, the core education panel agrees that there is a lack of alternative coming from OG on how they will separate themselves from capitalism, since OG heavily runs under the case of rejecting capitalism as a reasons of the vulnerability to the marginalized community, right, in the debate. And unfortunately, OG did not manage to show why their alternative is able to gain the necessary awareness or the ideal advocacy for the social movement, which became the huge downfall of OG in comparison to OO, because OO's exclusivity on reliance to corporation stands until the end of the debate. Thirdly, OG's fear of being unable to criticize the company was also engaged heavily by DLO in the debate. When DLO managed to prove why canceling the company can still happen, there is a sense of control dictated by the market or the society, not the other way around. So under that issue, OO managed to show why criticizing the company can still happen, even though there is a heavy reliance on the company in regards to promoting the causes, promoting the advocacies that are made by the social movement. Number 4, OG's rejection towards money was not backed up with a huge harm behind that one. Thus, OO's sense of urgency on gaining money by proving it as a crucial factor for the social movement still stands in the debate. So under this one, OO managed to show why their benefit overthrows or their benefit outweighs the harm of OG, because OG's harm on money was not really backed up with a good analysis as to why, even at the best case, they have a certain money, why at the end of the day, this gives like a false sense of security or even false sense of empowerment for the social movement, because we cannot catch the idea as to why money does not solve anything for the social movement and etc. So under that 4 initial reasons, that's the reason why OO is over OG. To the last reason why OO is over OG is on this. OG's claim on promotion being the object of blame to the prolonged issues was unfortunately not mechanized well, despite the fact the core adjudication panel agrees that this is a very potential premise brought by OG. Because of the lack of mechanization, the question to OG remains: one, why the promotion leads to a certain prolonged issues? Number two, why does the means of promotion worsen the ongoing process of advocacies? If OG can manage to show why the promotion leads to a certain prolonged issues, and number two, why does the means of promotion worsens the ongoing process of advocacy, I think OG can overthrow OO in a sense that they can prove why at the end of the day, this is becoming a backfiring agenda, or the promotion of corporation becomes the boomerang for the social movement, and etc. Even without the response coming from OO, the potential harm in OG was unfortunately not mechanized well in the debate earlier. The further reasons why OO is over OG is that DLO responded to this issue by saying that if the problem is about a prolonged issue, the one that should be subjected to blame is the racist system, be it racist politicians, white supremacists, for persisting in this issue of discrimination in the status quo, not the company that has the nobility to promote the causes of that social movement. So that's the reason why under that 5 reasons, OO can go over OG. So yeah, that's for the reasons behind the ranking. Now let's go to the scoring. So on the scoring on the debate exhibition, yeah, well, we find this: OG, Prime Minister 81, DPM 79 until 80, OO, LO 81, DLO 82, CG, GM got 76, GovWhip got 74. For CO, op member got 78 and op whip got 77. Now let's break down on the explanation on each speaker one by one. Let's talk about Prime Minister first. The reason why Prime Minister got 81 is because Prime Minister fulfills the range of 78 until 82. PM managed to establish the core issues in the debate and the arguments in regards to companies being unable to fully empathize with the grievances of the minorities, and also the social movement not being flexible and gets the fake sense of empowerment in return was a strong, solid case. However, the case of prolonged issues earlier were vulnerable to good responses, and even further, the alternative coming from OG was not really there. If OG can manage to prove why the prolonged issues was a very crucial issues, and there is the mechanization, and they provide a certain alternative, they can go to a next range actually, which is the 83 until 85. Same goes to the DPM here. So the reason why DPM got 79 to 80 was because of this. DPM was able to strengthen the idea of capitalism being the core reasons of minorities being oppressed in the status quo. DPM was also able to illustrate the idea of betrayal to the constituent by relying on the corporation. There is no obvious logical gap in this issue, which was agreed upon in the core adjudication panel. However, DPM did not manage to fully flip OO's sense of urgency and extends the points in regards to the flexibility of the campaign, because we thought that the airtime was minimum brought by the DPM in regards to the flexibility of the campaign, as it was brought in the last minute's speech. So yeah, this is a reminder for Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of Oppositions. I know matter grabbing is the priority that you want to make, but please make sure the airtime for a certain specific issues, especially the most important one, needs to be taken care of, so that so that there is no loopholes behind your case, and even further, it is not going to be capitalized by the closing teams to overthrow your teams in that regard. So yeah, that's for DPM. Next, Leader of Op. So Leader of Op managed to illustrate necessary context that solidifies their urgency to go for commercialization. For example, saying that we need to touch the spectrum of people that are not initially aware, and the case of blind attachment in customers when they believe that the commercialization can enable the customers to be able to topple down their preconceived notion was also well delivered in the debate. And the idea about new norm of the company and the optimism to the movement was also stellar. However, the reason why a Leader of Op cannot go higher than 82 was because of this. The aftermath of discussion, which was a very potential point coming from Leader of Op actually, was still vulnerable to good responses, because there is no necessary exclusivity as to why commercialization is the only way for us to foster like a widespread discussion or a conducive discussion. And even further, there is no necessary comparative made by LO and also DLO. Now, speaking of DLO, let's talk about that. DLO got 82 is because of this. DLO managed to debunk the biggest problem addressed by opening government about prolonged issues, companies' questionable accountability, which lessened the urgency of OG that strengthens or crystallized the reason why OO can go over OG to regret the trends of corporation's promotion. DLO was also able to extend LO's point in regards to maintaining relevance and support by thriving on certain trends. However, the extension was not linked back as to why discussion can be generated well, discussion can be spread widely, which is very crucial for the credibility of the social movement, and why discussion can be done conducively in OO. If both leader of op and deputy leader of op can do that, they can go to the range of 83 until 85. So that's the reason why the opening speakers got that score. Now let's talk about the closing speakers. Let's start with government member. Government member got 76 was because of this. The contents of GM addressed the core issues in regards to the social movement's progress in the aftermath. However, the issue of gaining independence by rejecting corporations' involvement was deficit in explanation and the mechanization, thus making the idea simplistic in the debate. The speech was clear to follow. That's the reason why, GM deserves at least 76 in the debate. Next one, government whip. The reason why government whip got 74 was because of this. Despite the clarity of speech that is easily followed in the government whip speech, government whip did not manage to draw an exclusive contribution of the speech because the attempt to frame the specific contribution of GM was minimum in the debate. The responses were also vulnerable because there is a limited strength to neutralize or to flip the case of both OO and also CO. So that's the reason why, unfortunately, the responses were not considered as a competent responses, and even further, it was considered as a simplistic response that was not able to flip the case coming from OO or CO, or even at least mitigate or even neutralize it. So that's the reason why government whip got 74. Next one, op member. Despite OM's ability to address the core issue that was not established initially in OO in regards to corporations' incentive of profit sharing, unfortunately, OM did not capitalize it by giving a necessary explanation or necessary airtime to further the issue on to further the unique premise that were in CO and were not in OO. Thus, the deficit of explanation resulted into OM being vulnerable to responses as well. OM did a great job in neutralizing some concerns brought by OG, for example, on the issue of capitalism, but that responses were not enough or were not sufficient to overthrow OG because there are certain issues that were not responded or certain issues that were not touched. That's the reason why OM got 78 instead of the other higher scores. Next one, Upwip. The reason why Upwip got 77 was because of this. In spite of the elaborated responses given by Upwip, unfortunately, Upwip's biggest downfall was focusing more on the idea of widespread awareness, which has been established earlier in the opening up. And Upwip did not manage to frame or even extend further on OM's unique premises in the debate in regards to the corporate's incentive of profit sharing. So the case of that corporate's incentive that can promise a win-win solution that was totally different with opening up was vulnerable to competent responses as well. Yeah, I get that the idea was not open for responses as Upwip was the last speaker, but seeing the minimum explanation or seeing the minimum mechanization on the corporate's incentive, imagine if there is another speaker speaking after Upwip, that means that this idea is still vulnerable to a certain competent responses. So for whip speakers, you have to speak as if that there will be another speaker speaking after you, especially in Upwip, just to make sure that you have to be able to show why your speech was not able to be touched with a certain competent responses and etc. to make sure that you can get an above average score that is 80 or even above. So that's the reason behind the rankings. That's also the reasons behind the scoring. Thank you very much for paying attention on this judge test results and also discussion. So we are signing off for this judge test results and discussion. We'll see you tomorrow in the preliminary rounds and elimination rounds. So good luck for all debaters and one judges and also invited judges. See you in HBP 2021.